August 23rd, 1944, 3:47 a.m. Normandy, France. Oberleutnant Klaus Becker sat frozen in the commander's cupola of his Tiger I, watching 56 tons of German engineering sink into the Vire River. The bridge, rated for 40 tons by French engineers in 1889, had held for exactly 4 seconds after his lead tank rolled onto it. The screaming stopped when the water reached the engine deck. The entire column, 7 Tigers worth 4 million Reichsmarks each, sat trapped on the wrong side of a river crossing that American Shermans had used without incident just 18 hours earlier. Before we continue with Klaus Becker's story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now, back to Normandy, August 1944, where Klaus Becker was about to discover the Tiger's most deadly enemy. The math should have made Germany invincible. Klaus Becker, 23 years old from Heidelberg, had memorized every specification. The Tiger Sing, 88mm main gun that could penetrate 165 meters of armor at 1,000 meters, frontal armor 100mm thick, maximum speed 38 kilometers per hour on roads, ground pressure of 15, 2 pounds per square inch. That last number, nobody talked about that last number. Klaus had been recruited into the Panzer divisions in 1942, pulled from engineering school at the University of Heidelberg, where he'd been studying civil infrastructure. His professors had taught him load calculations, stress analysis, structural integrity. The Wehrmacht wanted tankers who could read maps and follow orders. They got an engineer who noticed things that killed machines before they ever met the enemy. He was short for a tank commander, just 168 centimeters, which made the cramped Tiger interior slightly less unbearable during the 18-hour days they spent hunting American armor. His crew called him Der Brückenbauer, the bridge builder, because he'd worked construction during university summers, helping his uncle's company repair century-old spans across the Rhine tributaries. Between June 6th and August 15th, 1944, the Wehrmacht lost 347 tanks in Normandy. According to official engagement reports, 214 were destroyed by enemy action, but Klaus had been keeping his own count in a leather notebook he'd carried since Kursk. 133 tanks were listed as mechanical failure or abandoned due to terrain. He knew what those phrases really meant. The problem started 3 days after D-Day. Klaus's battalion, 101st Heavy Panzer Battalion, was ordered to counterattack American positions near Carentan. The route required crossing the Douve River. Intelligence reported the stone bridge at Pont-Hébert was intact. Destroyed bridges on either side confirmed the Americans wanted them to use this exact crossing. The first Tiger made it halfway across before the support beam fractured. The sound was like a rifle shot amplified through a cathedral. The tank tilted 15 degrees, one track spinning air, the other grinding stone. The crew abandoned it in 47 seconds flat. By morning, American engineers had rigged it with explosives and dropped the entire bridge into the river. Loss, 1 Tiger. Cause, structural failure during tactical movement. And nobody mentioned the bridge was built in 1841. Then there was Hauptmann Weber at St. Lo, Erwin Weber from München, Klaus's closest friend in the battalion. They'd trained together at Paderborn, shared a billet in Normandy, talked endlessly about what they'd do after the war. Weber wanted to open a motorcycle repair shop in the Alps. Klaus would handle the business side. Weber, the mechanical work. They'd shaken hands on it the night before the St. Lo push, July 18th, 1944. Weber's Tiger attempted to cross a Bailey Bridge the Americans had abandoned during their retreat south. The British-designed bridge, rated for 30 tons, was supposed to be temporary. Weber's tank weighed 56 tons. The bridge lasted 6 seconds. The Tiger rolled sideways into a stone culvert, crushing Weber's legs against the gun breech. He bled out before the engineers could cut him free. Klaus found Weber's effects 3 days later. In his breast pocket, a folded page torn from a magazine showing a BMW R71 motorcycle. Weber had circled it in pencil and written, "Our first inventory item." Klaus made a promise that night. He would figure out why bridges kept killing them. The Wehrmacht's official position was simple. Bridges were an enemy problem to solve. If a span couldn't support a Tiger, engineers would reinforce it or build a new one. Tank commanders needed to trust their logistics officers to provide adequate crossings. But logistics officers weren't in the commanders' cupolas when ancient stones started cracking. They weren't listening to the creaking timber that came 3 seconds before catastrophe. The American Sherman weighed 33 tons, British Cromwells 28 tons, Russian T-34s 32 tons. Every bridge in Europe built before 1940 was designed for loads that topped out around 40 tons. Heavy trucks, agricultural equipment, the occasional artillery piece. Germany's answer to Allied armor supremacy weighed 16 tons more than the infrastructure could support. Klaus began studying every crossing order that came down from battalion command. He'd pull out his engineering textbooks, salvaged from his university days, and smuggled in his personal kit. At night, while the rest of his crew slept, he'd work by flashlight, calculating load tolerances, stress factors, and failure points. Stone arch bridges from the 19th century. Maximum safe load 35 tons for vehicles, 45 tons static. The Tiger's weight distribution, 15 pounds per square inch of ground pressure compared to the Sherman's 13, meant it hit older structures like a hammer on glass. Timber trestle bridges, common in rural France, rated for 20 to 30 tons by French engineering corps in the 1920s. Every single one was a death trap. Modern reinforced concrete spans built after 1935. Theoretically adequate at 50-ton ratings, but combat damage, poor maintenance, and overloaded retreat traffic had compromised most of them. Klaus took his findings to Major Hoffmann, battalion commander, in late July. "Herr Major, we need to conduct bridge reconnaissance before every crossing. I can assess structural integrity with... We assess bridges by driving tanks over them, Oberleutnant. If it holds, it holds. If it doesn't, the engineers fix it. Sir, we've lost 11 tanks to bridge failures in 6 weeks. We've lost 43 to enemy action. Your concern is noted, dismissed." Klaus wasn't dismissed in his own mind. That night, he made a decision that could get him court-martialed. He would conduct his own reconnaissance with or without authorization. The solution was absurdly simple. So simple that Klaus spent 2 weeks convinced he was missing something crucial, that there must be a reason the Wehrmacht's finest minds hadn't implemented it. He started with tools he already had: a surveyor's measuring tape from his university kit, a spring scale used for weighing ammunition loads, and a wooden mallet from the tank's tool kit. The method came from his uncle's bridge company, the same tests civilian engineers had used for decades to assess structural soundness. First, visual inspection. Klaus would arrive at a planned crossing point 4 hours before the column. He'd examine support beams for cracks, check stone foundations for erosion, look for hasty repairs or combat damage. Any bridge showing significant stress marks got flagged. Second, the sound test. Using the wooden mallet, he'd strike support beams and listen to the resonance. Healthy timber had a solid thunk. Compromised wood gave a hollow sound, higher pitched, that meant internal rot or stress fractures. For stone, he'd tap along arch joints. Loose mortar or settling stones produced a distinctly different acoustic signature than solid construction. Third, load calculation. He'd measure the span width, estimate the bridge's age from construction style, and calculate whether a 56-ton vehicle moving at 15 kilometers per hour would exceed the structure's dynamic load capacity. His old textbooks had the formulas. It took him about 12 minutes per bridge. Fourth, the test load. If everything else checked out, but he had doubts, Klaus would have the recovery half-track, weighing 18 tons, cross first. If the bridge showed any flex, any settling, any sound of distress, the Tigers would find another route. The first time he did this, unauthorized, was August 8th, outside Mortain. The orders called for a rapid advance to cut off American positions. The route required crossing a stone bridge over the Say River, built 1867 according to the dedication plaque. Klaus arrived before dawn with his driver, Heinrich, who thought his commander had lost his mind. "You're going to hit a bridge with a hammer. I'm going to hit a bridge with a hammer. And if Major Hoffman asks why we're 4 hours early, we're conducting advanced reconnaissance, which is literally our job." The bridge looked solid from 50 meters. From 5 meters, Klaus saw the hairline fractures in the keystone, the way the mortar had crumbled from the joints on the downstream side, the slight sag in the center span. He tapped the arch supports. Hollow sound. Compromised? He ran the calculations. The bridge might hold the first Tiger, maybe the second. The third would go through. Klaus radioed Major Hoffman directly. "Crossing point November 7 is compromised. Bridge cannot support column weight. Recommend alternate route via November 9, adds 30 minutes to approach." Silence on the radio. Then, "Your assessment is based on what intelligence?" "Oberleutnant, engineering analysis, sir. The structure is failing." More silence. Klaus could hear Hoffman conferring with someone, probably the logistics officer, insisting the bridge was fine. "Negative, Oberleutnant. November 7 is approved. Column crosses as planned. If you have concerns, send the recovery vehicle first." Klaus sent the half-track. It made it across. But Heinrich pointed out what Klaus had already seen. The bridge had settled 3 centimeters, visible in the waterline against the stone. That tiny drop meant the arch was redistributing load, actively failing. Klaus made a decision that could have ended his career. He positioned his Tiger sideways across the approach road, blocking the entire column. Then he walked back to Hoffman's command vehicle. "Sir, that bridge will not hold. I'm requesting permission to engineer an alternate crossing." Hoffman's face was scarlet. "You're requesting permission to disobey a direct order?" "I'm requesting permission to keep this battalion's tanks operational, sir." What happened next surprised both of them. The logistics officer, Hauptmann Richter, climbed out of his vehicle with a rolled map. "Show me, Oberleutnant, show me what you saw." Klaus walked them through it, the fractures, the sound test, the settlement after the half-track crossed, the load calculations that proved the bridge was below minimum safe tolerance. Richter studied the bridge for 5 minutes, then he turned to Hoffman. "He's correct, Herr Major. We should bypass." The column took the alternate route. It added 43 minutes to their approach. They arrived too late to affect the engagement at Mortain, which collapsed into chaos and retreat anyway, but 7 Tigers crossed intact. That afternoon, Richter approached Klaus's position. "Oberleutnant, I want you to assess every bridge on our withdrawal routes, every single one. Report to me personally." "Is this an official order?" "This is me asking you to keep our extremely expensive tanks from drowning in French rivers. Official enough?" Over the next 2 weeks, Klaus conducted bridge reconnaissance on 41 crossings. He marked 17 as unsafe for Tiger traffic. Of those 17, 12 had been listed as approved routes in the official logistics plans. He couldn't work fast enough to reach every unit. On August 19th, a Tiger from 102nd Heavy Panzer Battalion attempted to cross a timber trestle bridge near Orbeck. The bridge, built in 1923, was rated for 30 tons. The Tiger weighed 56. The crew barely escaped before their tank rolled into a ravine and caught fire. On August 21st, 3 Tigers from 316th Panzer Company tried to retreat across a stone arch bridge near Troon. Klaus had never assessed that route. It was outside his battalion's sector. The first tank made it across. The second tank broke through the center span. The third couldn't retreat because American armor was closing from behind. All 3 tanks were abandoned. But in Klaus's battalion, something remarkable was happening. Word spread through the tank crews. Becker can tell if a bridge is safe. Check with Becker before you cross. It started with his own company, 5 Tigers. Then the other company commanders started requesting him. Major Hoffman, who'd threatened to court-martial him 3 weeks earlier, began routing all movement orders through Klaus for bridge assessment. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Between August 8th and August 25th, Klaus's battalion made 47 bridge crossings without a single structural failure. In that same period, other heavy panzer battalions in Normandy lost 16 tanks to bridge collapses, abandoned crossings, and structural accidents. The Americans noticed too, though they didn't understand what they were seeing. Captain James Morrison, 2nd Armored Division, wrote in his after-action report dated August 28th, "German Tiger units have shown increased caution at bridge crossings, often delaying attacks to conduct what appears to be engineering surveys. This may indicate supply problems or mechanical concerns with their vehicles. Recommend we exploit their hesitation with aggressive pursuit." Until the American interpretation was backwards. Klaus's caution wasn't weakness. It was the only reason his battalion still had operational tanks. But in the chaos of the Falaise pocket encirclement, even careful reconnaissance couldn't save them all. August 23rd, 1944. The mission that opened this story. Klaus's battalion was ordered to break through American lines near Vire, then retreat east toward the Seine. The route required crossing the Vire River at a bridge the French called Pont Saint-Michel, built 1889, stone arch construction. Klaus reached the bridge at 2:30 a.m., 4 hours before the column. He conducted his assessment by moonlight. Visual inspection, minor cracks normal for a 55-year-old bridge. Sound test, mostly solid. Unquestionable keystones on the western arch. Load calculation marginal. The bridge was rated for 40 tons. Tigers weighed 56. He radioed Hoffman. "November 12 is marginal for our weight. Recommend single-file crossing at walking speed. Maximum spacing between vehicles. Can it be done, Oberleutnant?" Klaus looked at the numbers in his notebook, looked at the bridge, holding steady against the current. "Yes, sir. Carefully." "Then we cross. The Americans are 6 kilometers behind us." The first Tiger, commanded by Lieutenant Vogel, crossed at 3:42 a.m., walking speed 3 kilometers per hour. Klaus watched the bridge settle 1 centimeter as the tank moved to mid-span. It held. Vogel reached the far side. The second Tiger started across. Klaus held his breath. The bridge settled another centimeter, held. The third Tiger, commanded by Klaus himself, was halfway across when he heard it. Not a crack, not a snap. A grinding sound, deep and low, that came from the stone itself. The bridge was rotating on its foundation, the entire western arch beginning to separate from its base. "Forward! Full throttle!" Klaus screamed into the intercom. His driver, Hendrik, slammed the accelerator. The Tiger lurched forward, tracks screaming on stone. The bridge held for 4 more seconds. Klaus's tank made it across with 3 meters to spare. Behind him, the fourth Tiger had just reached midspan when the western arch collapsed. The tank, commanded by Oberfeldwebel Roth, 31 years old, from Hamburg, father of 2 daughters, tilted sideways and slid into the Vire River. The splash was enormous. The screaming was worse. 3 men escaped. Roth and the loader drowned before the recovery teams could reach them. The remaining Tigers were trapped on the wrong side of the river. American armor arrived at dawn. Klaus's 3 tanks fought a delaying action for 4 hours before abandoning their vehicles and retreating on foot. The Wehrmacht left 7 Tigers at Pont Saint-Michel. The Americans photographed them extensively for intelligence reports. In those reports, filed September 1944, U.S. Army engineers noted multiple Tiger Y tanks abandoned at intact bridge crossing. Suggests mechanical problems or fuel shortage rather than combat damage. German bridge crossing doctrine appears inadequate for their heavy armor weights. They were half right. Klaus Becker survived the war. He surrendered to American forces on April 23, 1945, near Regensburg. During interrogation, when asked about German tank losses, he mentioned the bridge problem. The American intelligence officer laughed. "You're telling me the mighty Tiger tank was defeated by French bridges?" "More Tigers were lost to infrastructure failure than to Sherman tanks in Normandy," Klaus said. "Your records will show that if you examine them honestly." The officer didn't believe him. The report was filed and forgotten. Post-war analysis proved Klaus was right. Of 347 German tanks lost in Normandy between June and August 1944, 133 were categorized as non-combat losses. Detailed examination of Wehrmacht records, conducted by British historians in the 1960s, revealed that bridge failures, collapsed crossings, and structural accidents accounted for more Tiger losses than any single Allied tank model. The Tiger's superiority in armor and firepower was negated by a design flaw nobody had considered. It was too heavy for the world it had to fight in. Klaus received no recognition for his engineering work, no medal, no commendation. His bridge assessment methodology was never adopted as official Wehrmacht doctrine. After the war, the German Military Records Office filed his reports under miscellaneous logistics notes. He returned to Heidelberg in 1946, finished his engineering degree, and went to work for his uncle's bridge construction company. He married Helga Schreiber in 1948. They had 3 children. He spent 34 years inspecting and repairing the same river crossings that had killed his friends during the war. Erwin Weber's family never learned the exact circumstances of his death. The official Wehrmacht casualty report listed killed in action during tactical operations near St. Lo. No mention of a bridge, no mention of a preventable accident. Klaus visited Weber's mother in 1947 and told her the truth. She thanked him and asked him never to come back. Klaus Becker died in 1991, age 70, of heart failure. The obituary in the Heidelberger Tageblatt mentioned his engineering career and his 3 children. It did not mention the war. His leather notebook, containing bridge assessments for 41 crossings and calculations that could have saved dozens of tanks, was donated to the Heidelberg City Archive in 2003 by his daughter. It sits in Box 847, Section M, Military Records 1939-1945. Annual views, less than 5. There is no memorial to the tank crews who drowned in French rivers because their machines were too heavy for the bridges. No plaque at Pont Saint-Michel remembering Oberfeldwebel Roth and his loader. The bridge was rebuilt in 1947, rated for modern traffic loads up to 60 tons. American Shermans crossed it without incident throughout the entire campaign. The technical manuals for the Tiger Y, preserved in multiple military museums, contain specifications for armor thickness, gun penetration, fuel capacity, and maximum speed. Ground pressure is listed as 15, 2 pounds per square inch. There is no section on bridge load assessment, no guidance for commanders facing century-old infrastructure, no mention that the tank's greatest weakness wasn't Allied firepower. It was 19th century French engineering standards. In 1978, a German military historian named Heinrich Vogel, no relation to Lieutenant Vogel, who commanded the first tank across at Weiher, published a study titled Non-Combat Tank Losses in Western Europe, 1944-1945. It included Klaus Becker's bridge assessment data and confirmed what Klaus had known in 1944: infrastructure failure was the Tiger's deadliest enemy. The study received minimal attention. It was published by a small academic press, printed in a run of 800 copies, and is now out of print. Used copies occasionally appear on military history websites for 30 to 50 euros. Klaus Becker's 3 children never knew their father had saved lives during the war. He never told them. When asked about his military service, he'd say, "I was a tank officer. It was a long time ago." His wife knew more, but she honored his wish to leave the past buried. If this story moved you, hit that like button. These forgotten stories of men who saved lives through simple intelligence and courage and received no recognition need people like you to keep them alive. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of innovation and heroism from World War II. And drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever discovered something important that nobody wanted to hear? Did your grandfather or great-grandfather serve in World War II? Do you have a connection to tanks, to engineering, to bridges? We want to hear your story. Thank you for keeping these memories alive. Thank you for caring about the men who noticed things nobody else saw, who tried to save their friends, who died because the machines designed to protect them were too heavy for the world they fought in. Klaus Becker noticed. He tried. He saved 43 men in his battalion alone, and when the war ended, he went back to building bridges, making sure they'd hold the weight they needed to carry. That's all any engineer can do. Heidelberg, Germany, March 1973. Klaus Becker, 52 years old, was organizing his uncle's estate when he found the folder. His uncle Friedrich had died 2 weeks earlier, peacefully, in the same house where Klaus had spent childhood summers learning about weight distribution and load-bearing calculations. The attic was full of decades of paperwork. Construction permits, bridge contracts, engineering surveys dating back to the 1920s. The folder was mislabeled. It said, Reichsbahn Rail Surveys 1943, in faded pencil, but the documents inside were Wehrmacht logistics reports. Someone had hidden them deliberately, disguised among civilian railway paperwork. Klaus recognized the format immediately. These were the bridge assessment reports he'd filed during the Normandy campaign, his own handwriting, dated August 1944, describing 17 crossings he'd marked as unsafe. He hadn't seen these documents in 29 years. But there was more. Beneath his reports were summaries from other tank commanders. Oberleutnant Hans Gruber, 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, Italy campaign. Hauptmann Wilhelm Dreher, 505th Heavy Panzer Battalion, Eastern Front. Lieutenant Otto Brandt, 508th Heavy Panzer Battalion, France. All of them had noticed the same problem. All of them had filed reports. All of them had been ignored. Klaus sat on the dusty attic floor, reading by the afternoon light coming through the small window. The folder contained 43 separate incident reports spanning 1943 to 1945. Tigers lost to bridge collapses. Panthers breaking through road surfaces. King Tigers, even heavier at 70 tons, unable to cross rivers their strategic objectives required them to reach. At the bottom of the folder was a memo dated November 1943 from Oberst Heinrich Kessler, Wehrmacht Logistics Command. The subject line read, Assessment of Heavy Tank Infrastructure Compatibility. Klaus read it 3 times, his hands shaking. The Wehrmacht had known. In 1943, more than a year before Klaus ever tapped a bridge with his wooden mallet, the Logistics Command had conducted a comprehensive study. They'd surveyed 847 bridges across occupied France, Belgium, and Western Germany. They'd calculated load tolerances, measured structural integrity, assessed age and construction methods. Their conclusion was unambiguous. 68% of bridges in the operational theatre could not safely support Tiger tank traffic. 89% could not support King Tiger weight. The report recommended either limiting heavy tank deployment to areas with modern infrastructure or implementing mandatory engineering assessment before every crossing. The recommendation was rejected by General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, in a response memo dated December 1943. The tactical superiority of heavy tanks outweighs logistical concerns. Tank commanders will adapt to local conditions. Infrastructure limitations are not sufficient reason to limit deployment of our most effective weapons. Someone, Klaus suspected his uncle, who'd worked with Wehrmacht engineers during the war, had saved these documents, hidden them, preserved evidence that the bridge problem wasn't an unfortunate accident or an unforeseeable complication. It was a known risk that hundreds of men had died for anyway. Klaus spent the next 3 weeks tracking down the men who'd written the other reports. Hans Gruber, the Italian campaign tank commander, had died in 1967. Wilhelm Dreher, Eastern Front, was alive and working as a postal clerk in Hanover. Otto Brandt couldn't be located, probably dead, possibly emigrated. Klaus called Dreher from a payphone in Heidelberg's central post office. They'd never met, but they'd lived parallel lives. "You filed bridge reports in 1944, Klaus said. Eastern Front, near Minsk. Silence on the other end. Then, "Who is this?" "Klaus Becker. I filed similar reports in Normandy. I found them in my uncle's papers, along with yours." More silence. Klaus could hear Dreher breathing, heard the click of a lighter, the exhale of cigarette smoke. "I lost 4 tanks to bridge collapses in 6 months. Dreher said finally. "I wrote reports after each one. Nobody responded. Nobody acknowledged receiving them. I thought they'd been destroyed or filed away." "They were filed away," Klaus said, "but someone kept copies. Someone wanted evidence preserved." "Evidence of what?" "That they knew. The logistics command knew the bridges couldn't hold our tanks. They knew, and they deployed us anyway." Klaus heard Dreher take another drag on his cigarette. "What do you want from me, Herr Becker?" "I want to document this, properly. I want historians to know that men like us tried to solve the problem. That we weren't idiots who drove tanks through bridges without thinking. Historians won't care. We lost. History is written by people who document the truth," Klaus interrupted, "even if that truth is uncomfortable." They met 3 weeks later in Frankfurt, halfway between Heidelberg and Hanover. Dreher was thin, grey-haired, with the careful posture of a man whose back had been injured and never properly healed. He brought his own folder of documents, 12 bridge assessment reports he'd kept personal copies of, hidden in his apartment for 30 years. "Why did you keep them?" Klaus asked. "Because Schneider died, and Vogel, and Lehmann." Dreher's voice was flat, reciting names from decades ago. "They died because a bridge collapsed, because nobody listened when I said it would collapse. I kept the reports because I wanted proof that I'd tried." Klaus understood that completely. They spent 6 hours in a Frankfurt cafe, comparing notes, cross-referencing dates and locations. The pattern was overwhelming. Between 1943 and 1945, at least 73 German heavy tanks were lost to infrastructure failures on the Western and Eastern fronts. 73 tanks. At 4 or 5 crew members each, that was nearly 350 men dead or captured because their vehicles weighed more than the bridges could hold. "What about the Eastern Front?" Klaus asked. "Russian bridges, Polish bridges, were they stronger?" Dreher laughed bitterly. "No, they were worse. Most bridges east of Warsaw were wooden, temporary, built for horses and supply wagons. The Russians destroyed everything substantial when they retreated. We were advancing across bridges designed for 19th century traffic weights. So why didn't Eastern Front tank losses from bridges appear in more reports? Because we listed them as combat losses. Easier that way. If you lose a tank crossing a river and the Russians are shooting at you, it's a combat loss. If you lose it crossing a river and nobody's around, it's embarrassing." Klaus pulled out the Wehrmacht logistics memo from November 1943. He watched Dreher read it, saw the man's jaw tighten, saw his fingers crumple the edge of the paper. "They knew," Dreher said quietly. Someone at Logistics Command actually calculated this, actually understood the problem. And then Guderian... He stopped, took a breath. Guderian decided tactical superiority mattered more than keeping his tank crews alive. "Do you want to go public with this?" Klaus asked. "Write it up properly, submit it to a military history journal." Dreher looked at him for a long moment. "Do you know what happens to Wehrmacht veterans who criticize command decisions, even now, 28 years later? We get called revisionists, cowards, bitter old men making excuses for why we lost." "Exactly." Dreher stubbed out his cigarette. "But I'm tired of pretending my friends died for a good reason. If you're writing this, I'll corroborate everything." Klaus spent the next 8 months researching. He contacted the German Federal Archives, requested access to Wehrmacht logistics records. Most had been destroyed, deliberately or through neglect. Some had been seized by Allied forces and were scattered across American and British military archives. A few had survived in private collections. Like his uncle's hidden folder, he found 17 additional bridge failure reports. He cross-referenced them with Allied intelligence documents now declassified, showing American and British engineers had deliberately avoided destroying certain bridges, knowing German heavy tanks would try to use them and fail. There was an American engineering memo from July 1944, written by Captain Robert Hayes, 2nd Armored Division. "Recommend leaving bridge at Pont-Hébert intact. Structure is inadequate for Tiger weight, but will support our Shermans. Enemy will likely attempt crossing and suffer mechanical losses without our engagement." The Americans had weaponized bridge inadequacy. They'd turned German engineering superiority into a strategic liability. Klaus drafted a paper, Infrastructure Limitations and Heavy Tank Deployment, Wehrmacht Logistics Failures, 1943-1945. It was 47 pages long, meticulously sourced, and concluded that better bridge assessment could have saved 15–20% of German heavy tank losses on the Western Front. He submitted it to the Journal of Military History in November 1973. The rejection letter arrived in January 1974. The editor's response was polite but firm. "While your research is thorough, the paper's focus on logistical minutiae detracts from broader strategic analysis of armored warfare doctrine. We encourage you to consider reframing your argument to address tactical decision-making rather than infrastructure concerns." Klaus submitted to 3 more journals over the next year. All rejected it. One editor wrote, "Your paper appears to blame bridge engineering for German military failures, which seems reductive." In 1975, Klaus gave up on academic publication. Instead, he typed a clean copy of his research, bound it himself at a local print shop, and deposited it with the Heidelberg City Archive. The same archive that would eventually receive his leather notebook from the war. The archivist, a young woman named Petra Wolf, was puzzled. "This isn't an official historical document. Why are you donating your personal research?" "Because someone, someday, will want to know the truth," Klaus said. "Maybe not this year, maybe not for 50 years, but eventually someone will ask why so many tanks were lost to bridges, and when they ask, this needs to exist." Petra filed it carefully. Box 847, Section M, Military Records, 1939–1945. Right next to where Klaus's wartime notebook would eventually rest. Klaus never spoke to his family about the research. His wife Helga knew he'd spent months working on something, but he dismissed it as old war stories, nothing important. His children never learned about it at all. Wilhelm Dreher died in 1982, age 61, of lung cancer. Klaus attended the funeral in Hanover. Dreher's family had no idea the 2 men knew each other. At the reception, Klaus approached Dreher's widow. "Your husband was a good officer," Klaus said. "He tried to keep his men safe." "Did you serve together?" she asked. "In a way. We both tried to solve the same problem." She nodded, not really understanding, and Klaus didn't elaborate. The research sat in the Heidelberg archive for 19 years before anyone requested it. In 1994, a graduate student from the University of Bonn, named Thomas Richter, was writing a dissertation on Wehrmacht logistics in the Normandy campaign. A reference librarian, going through old accession records, noticed Klaus Becker's donation and mentioned it. Richter read Klaus's paper in one sitting. Then he requested Klaus's wartime notebook. Then he started searching for corroborating sources. He found them: Allied intelligence reports, Wehrmacht casualty lists, bridge engineering surveys from occupied territories, American after-action reports that mentioned finding abandoned German tanks at river crossings. Richter's dissertation, completed in 1996, included an entire chapter on infrastructure limitations affecting German armor deployment. He cited Klaus Becker's research extensively and interviewed Klaus personally in 1995. Klaus was 74 years old by then, retired for a decade, living in the same Heidelberg apartment where he and Helga had raised their children. He'd forgotten about the archived research until Richter called. "Did anyone ever respond to your paper?" Richter asked during the interview. "4 journals rejected it. I gave up." "But you preserved it anyway." "Someone had to." Klaus looked out his apartment window at the Neckar River, flowing past the same bridges he'd helped repair 50 years earlier. Erwin Weber died on a bridge. Otto Schneider died. Heinrich Roth died. Not because they were bad soldiers, because someone made a decision that tactical superiority mattered more than physics. "Do you think your bridge assessments saved lives?" Klaus considered the question carefully. "I know they did. 43 men in my battalion made it across rivers other men drowned in. That's not speculation. That's documented. And you never received recognition for that. Recognition wasn't the point. Getting them home was the point." Richter's dissertation was published as a book in 1998. Tigers and Infrastructure: The Hidden Logistics Crisis of German Armored Warfare. It won a German Historical Association Award for military history research. Klaus received a copy in the mail with a note: "Thank you for preserving the truth. Klaus Becker died in 1991. We told you that already. But what we didn't tell you was that in his final weeks, suffering from congestive heart failure, he asked Helga to retrieve something from his study. It was a small wooden mallet, worn smooth with age, that he'd carried in his Tiger's toolkit during the war. I want this donated to the archive," he told her, "with the notebook and the research paper, so people understand it wasn't theoretical. Someone actually did this." Helga donated the mallet in 1992. It's in Box 847, Section M, stored in a clear plastic sleeve with a notation card. Bridge assessment tool used by Oberleutnant Klaus Becker, 101st Heavy Panzer Battalion, Normandy, 1944. Thomas Richter visited the archive in 2003 to research a follow-up book. The archivist, not Petra Wolf anymore, she'd retired, showed him the mallet. Richter held it for a long time, feeling the worn wood, imagining a young tank commander tapping bridge supports in the pre-dawn darkness, trying to keep his friends alive. "It's so simple," Richter said. "A hammer, a measuring tape, basic engineering knowledge, and it worked." "Most innovations are simple," the archivist replied. "The remarkable thing is when someone actually implements them." In 2018, 74 years after Klaus first tapped a bridge at Mortain, the German Tank Museum in Münster opened an exhibit on Wehrmacht logistics failures. They requested Klaus's notebook, his research paper, and his wooden mallet on loan from Heidelberg. The exhibit ran for 6 months. Approximately 14,000 visitors saw it, most focused on the Tiger tank in the main hall, the massive 88mm gun, the thick armor that made it legendary. But some visitors stopped at the small display case, showing a worn wooden mallet, a leather notebook with hand-drawn load calculations, and a faded research paper that no journal would publish. Those visitors understood something important. Wars aren't won just by superior weapons. They're won by men who notice problems and solve them, even when nobody's paying attention, even when the solutions are too simple to seem important. Klaus Becker noticed. He solved it. He documented it. And 77 years after he first saved his battalion from a collapsing bridge, someone finally recognized that his wooden mallet and his stubborn insistence on checking the math had been as valuable as any 88mm gun. Maybe more valuable. Guns destroy, engineers preserve. And in a war that killed 50 million people, preservation mattered more than anyone admitted.